back to the War Room, my beautiful people. It has been a minute, but I am back, and I am here with my boy Eddie Goldman from No Hold Barred News. And Eddie is in the house today. We're going to bring up quite a few topics. We should start off with pride, though. Okay, so Eddie, welcome to the War Room, brother. What's going on today in your world?
Well, glad to be with you, even though we're recording on July the 1st. You know, these holidays are set up, Pride Month, Black History Month, and things like that. They represent historical events, but really they should be honored 12 months out of the year. So that's what we're going to do. We also didn't have a chance during June to talk too much about that, so we're going to catch up a little bit on it. But I don't think people should just be restricted to these formalistic celebrations and say, well, June is over, we can't talk about that, let's talk about anything else.
Oh no. Well, I was away in June because my nonprofit, my little lesbian nonprofit, it's a LGBTQ women's and non-binary nonprofit. But we hosted Women's Freedom Festival, co-sponsored by the city of West Hollywood and She Angels Foundation on June 19th. And it was a worldwide event, 4 hours of LGBTQ art and music and celebration. It was just a beautiful event. So yes, I agree. It's about pride every single day, whether it's Black pride, brown pride, indigenous pride, LGBTQ pride, whatever your pride is, you need to wear it proudly on your sleeves, people.
Exactly.
So, exactly. So Eddie, tell me about, there's some stuff going on. Is this with, I read the transgender bill that the SCOTUS, I guess the Supreme Court upheld the transgender people can use the bathroom, folks. Okay, that's the bottom line, and you guys can't stop transgender people from using whatever bathroom they choose. So, Eddie, you want to give us a breakdown on what that decision was about?
Yeah, it's you can't have discrimination on the basis of sex, even before the Equality Act, which has to be passed in the Congress, and Biden has been for that all along. It's pretty clear you're discriminating on the basis of sex. Even with the conservatives on the Supreme Court, they're agreeing with that. If you're keeping a transgender person out, you're discriminating on the basis of sex. Aside from being cruel and absolutely stupid, this panic about if a trans person uses a bathroom, what's going to happen? What are the rate of rapes by trans people on cis people? What are the rate of rapes by cis people on trans people? And what are the rate of rapes on cis people on other cis people? I think we have some idea about where the danger of rape and sexual assault is coming from. But there's a concerted campaign by a number of these shadowy Christian right organizations with a lot of money to use this as a wedge and create fear and panic among certain people, whip people up, people that believe that Fox News is anything else other than nonsense and propaganda. And it's playing out in the world of sport, and they are getting allied with certain of the feminist groups, certain women's feminist groups are joining this campaign to keep out trans women athletes out of sports. And this is coming to a head with the Tokyo Olympics, assuming it even takes place. And, you know, we can get to that abomination a little bit later. But there's been a big attack that's gone on because a New Zealand weightlifter, Laurel Hubbard, who's trans, is qualified to make the Olympics. And apparently she'll be the first openly transgender athlete to compete in an Olympics. And she's 43 years old. And by the way, weightlifting could be cut from the Olympics because of the rampant corruption in the International Weightlifting Federation, years and years of covering up dope tests. A lot of this has been talked about on the Inside the Games and other websites. But she apparently, hopefully, is clean, and she's been pretty good at international competition. She won silver at the 2017 World Championships and gold at the 2019 Pacific Games. She's had some injuries, as a lot of athletes do. She broke her arm 3 years ago and recovered, and she's back, and she made it for New Zealand. And she has met all the requirements that the International Olympic Committee has for trans athletes to be able to compete. She transitioned at about the age of 35. As I said, she's 43 now. She was a pretty good weightlifter in those days in the men's division. And now she's complying with all the rules. The IOC has these guidelines where you do not have to have the gender or sex reassignment surgery, whatever the official name of that is. But you have to have a testosterone level of less than 10 nanomoles per liter for at least a year prior to competition. And that's from taking the various hormones that will cut down your testosterone. She's complied with all that. She's done all that. It can't be easy. It can't be easy for anybody to prepare for the Olympics, let alone to have their whole personal history written about in the world's media and campaigns organized against them. So she's been trying to do the right thing, play by the rules. And there's an interesting podcast called Translash that Imara Jones produces. I don't know if you've heard that one, but she really went in depth and she spoke to some people that I think it's called the so-called Alliance Defending Freedom, which is this cockamamie ultra-right theocratic organization that wants to ban Laurel Hubbard and is behind all these anti-trans bills in numerous states in the United States. A lot of it started in Connecticut when two young black girls in high school won a track race. And so a lot of the white cis women went to sue against them. Now, as far as I know, these two young women followed all the rules for qualifying. Yet you saw a combination of anti-trans insanity and racism in trying to get their results thrown out because they lost the goddamn race. Some people win, some people lose. It used to be, this is the attitude I was taught in wrestling, although it certainly wasn't consistent. If you lose, you got to improve yourself and do better.
Absolutely.
Don't start blaming people. Don't start looking for excuses, even if there are problems. If you lost the damn race, train harder and get better. And if you can't, if the other person is better than you, so be it. Congratulate them on that and live with that and learn the lessons and move on. But you have all these entitled people and bigoted people are going absolutely nuts about this. And you also have some of this being assisted by an organization, World Athletics, which used to be the IAAF, that runs athletics, or in the US, in the US is give different names to these sports. We call it track and field.
Mm.
So while the IOC has this uh, level of that you have to have less than 10 nanomoles per liter for a year to qualify, World Athletics, as it's now called, changed its qualifications and they set it at 5 nanomoles per liter, half the amount. And so what they've been trying to do, for example, is they have been working to keep out Caster Semenya from
Right.
the Olympics. And as I don't even know if she's going to be able to compete in the Olympics in her best events. She's somebody with a naturally, for women, high level of testosterone. Some have called her intersex. I don't know if that's the right term,
Yeah,
but
she was born with both genitalia.
right. This is the way she was born.
Right.
She's passed every drug test they have. In fact, a couple of years ago at one of the Olympics, she finished second in the race to a Russian, but the Russian got disqualified for taking drugs. She didn't take the
Crazy.
drugs, so she, was moved
Right.
up from
Right.
silver to gold. She's, as far as I know, she's passed every one of these drug tests. But what they want her to do, they wrote these rules to keep her and other intersex women out of these races, who all happen to be, surprise, surprise, African. They want to keep all these African women out to advance the careers of the European women. So again, you have this combination of racism, national
Right.
chauvinism, anti-trans, anti-intersex hysteria that's gone on. And she's lost a couple of cases, including at the so-called Court of Arbitration for Sport, which is about as neutral as the GOP Arizona recount tally that's going on, because that is headed by John Coates, a longtime vice president of the International Olympic Committee and one of the key people organizing the Tokyo Olympic Games. So he's not somebody that is a neutral observer, and he's the one in charge of all that. So she, again, I don't know what the latest qualifications were, but they want her out. And this is part of a whole move, both by these right wing theocrats, but also certain feminists that I've seen in certain feminist organizations that are trying to create a whole separation and contradiction between cis women, intersex women, trans women, non-binary women, and to create all this stuff. So it's really disgusting. We don't know whether Laurel Hubbard will get a medal or not. That obviously remains to be seen. Thus far, no transgender athlete has won an Olympic medal. And the other factor, of course, as I mentioned, weightlifting, numerous countries are disqualified from competing in the Olympics because they've had so many positive doping tests. And instead of focusing on this, you see these loony bins out there attacking Laurel Hubbard, who
Right.
again, she's followed the rules, she's done what everybody asked. But what's interesting is that in the U.S., you had a recent statement from USA Track and Fields organization that Cece Telfer, who had been an NCAA D2 track and field champion, will not be allowed to compete in the women's 400-meter hurdles at the Olympic trials because of she did not meet eligibility requirements. And I don't know what's really spelled out, but it probably had to do with testosterone levels. So since World Athletics has this lower limit, it might have been there. She might have been a victim of that she won't be able to compete at the Olympics either. And her manager issued a statement to CNN that was very gracious. They said they're going to respect U.S. Track and Field's decision, and is one of these positive statements. I haven't seen anything from CC Telford since, but again, this would be speculation. If World Athletics were following the rest of the requirements in the competing in the Olympics, she might have been able to compete because she, as I said, has been able to compete in college in the NCAA events and has done very well there. So World Athletics is keeping out Cece Telfer, they're keeping out Caster Semenya and others. Uh, she also um, has been involved with Franklin Pierce University in the U.S. We're going to see what happens with her, but it's really disgusting. And what's interesting is that the feminist anti-trans people, I think there's the term turf for that.
Yes. Yes.
They said, well, they should have a separate category. You, you have men's and women's athletes generally compete separately, which is obviously true. So you should put trans athletes in another category. That's a way of another way of a sneaky way of saying let's keep them out. Because
Right.
how many trans athletes are there? How are you going to have an Olympics category for trans athletes
Right.
when you have so few of them, or in track or wrestling or any other sport that's out there? So what they basically want to happen is just attack trans people, take away their right to compete. And my view is that everybody should have a right to compete, whether you're going to be on the Olympic level or whether you were, you know, a lousy high school wrestler like I was. You should have the right to compete
You
because of
should
the
absolutely.
benefits of sport, and you do as well as you can. And some people have natural advantages. I wrestled people that were immensely stronger than me. They get me done. I couldn't move. Well, okay. I in those days I trained my ass off. I did and I'm assuming the other wrestlers did that I faced too, but they were stronger. I probably knew as much wrestling, but strength is a
Right.
factor in there. That's that's part of sports. That's part of competition. That's part of life.
Right.
So I think that also the attitude, the policy of everybody has a right to compete has also come up in the Olympic movement regarding the rights of wrestlers from all countries to compete. And when I say all countries, you don't have to necessarily approve of what their government is doing. We're talking about the athletes. So you have a situation with Iran where its judo federation was suspended by the International Judo Federation because they were forcing Iranian athletes to throw matches intentionally, so in a tournament, so they wouldn't have to face an Israeli athlete.
What?
Iran has a Yes, there was a
Crazy.
whole article. I posted a link on it.
That is
CNN did a whole investigative report, and the International Judo Federation suspended them. Iran has a lot of good judokas, and one of the sports that Israel excels in is judo. They've had world champions, medalists. So when you have people in that level, they're bound to meet at many of these tournaments that go on. So there was a case of Saeed Malai, who had been a world champion, who was doing well in a tournament, and they had all these big shots calling him, saying, "You got to throw your match, because if you win, your next match is going to be with an Israeli, and we can't have that." He was forced, as many athletes from Iran have been, to leave the country. He had a defect. He first went to stayed in Germany, and now he's competing for Mongolia. And you've had a number of these athletes. You can look at the CNN article. I linked it on my uh, Twitter page, that have had this same situation, or you've had women athletes that would post a picture of themselves without the compulsory hijab, and they'd get all kinds of threats, and they had to basically leave their countries. You have horrible conditions for athletes. And of course, you had Iran murdering the wrestler Navid Afkari. And even though he wasn't on as an adult, wasn't on the Olympic level, he was a good wrestler. He trained with a number of Olympians, and they murdered him on trumped up charges to suppress demonstrations going on against the economic and political oppression that exists from the majority of people by the Islamic Republic regime, by the mullahs and the IRGC and all these people that are completely screwing over the masses of people in Iran. So to me, it applies to that. And you certainly don't have to agree with what the government of Israel does to say that these Israeli athletes should be able to compete alongside everybody else. Same thing, you don't have to agree with everything the American government has done or these others. But if they break the rules, then you have to take a different position. So that's part of that general battle that's gone on. And of course, as we go to Tokyo Olympics,
The super spreader
assuming that goes
games.
on, yeah, that's turning out to be pretty much of a mess. The latest is that this is as of today, Thursday, 673 new COVID-19 cases in the Tokyo metropolitan area, up from 570 a week earlier, marking 12 straight days of week-on-week rises. That's from Kyoto News. And the capital's daily count topped 700 on Wednesday for the first time since May 26. Health experts have warned that at the current pace, the daily figure could balloon to 3,000 in August,
That is
which would be
crazy.
the last couple of weeks of the Olympics and the beginning of the Paralympics. And you already had this fiasco. And of course, who's going to get hurt the most by this are athletes coming in from countries with low vaccination rates or have used weaker vaccines like
Mm.
AstraZeneca or Johnson& and Johnson. So recently, when a delegation of athletes and coaches from Uganda arrived in Tokyo, they had been vaccinated already. They had tested clean before they got on the plane. And when he got there, one of the athletes tested positive.
Mm.
And then I think it was actually a coach the first time. And then there was a second positive from an athlete. So they had to put the whole team in quarantine, and a lot of these teams are staying outside of Tokyo, so they're traveling all over the place in Japan. And so what we're going to see, I'm calling it the Bach Coates Tokyo variant of COVID-19 after Thomas Bach and Coates, because these are the people that have been insisting on holding these games. And I don't know how many athletes are going to start to say they're not going. I know we have some very high profile athletes like Serena Williams, who's had injuries, and some other top level tennis players who don't really have to worry much about the Olympics because they're the top money earners in professional tennis. But for other athletes, this is it.
Right.
This is the highest level they're going to be at. So you already had the weightlifters from Samoa have said they're not going to be going to the Tokyo Olympics. These are weightlifters who are qualified. And when you read the article, what's interesting, there will be other athletes representing Samoa who will be going to Tokyo, but these others are based outside Samoa. They said 2 in Australia, 4 in New Zealand, 1 in the US, and 1 already in Japan, which means that after the Olympics, they're going to be returning there rather than to Samoa, whereas these three weightlifters would have returned home to Samoa, and they want to keep the virus, they want to keep this out of Samoa.
Right.
I don't know how often this is going to happen, but I frankly think that the athlete organizations that are all preparing for this have betrayed the athletes, are bringing them into a horrible potential super spreader situation, and they're not standing up for the athletes. And somebody has to, because athletes don't always think of their own best interests. I mean, we know from watching boxing, we see a lot of boxers getting beaten from one end of the ring to the other, and the referee or even the corner says, "How you feel?" "I'm okay. I can go on." You can't leave it up to the athlete, and they've all been betrayed. Whether they go there or whether they get pulled out, they've all been betrayed by this. And I think this will become clearer as time goes on. And of course, the other aspect of betrayal is a so-called ban that was put on Russia because of the state-sponsored doping program, which was minimized by John Coates' Court of Arbitration for Sport. So instead of representing Russia, they're going to be saying they represent the Russian Olympic Committee. I mean, what's the difference? And they
Right.
can't raise their flag and play their anthem if they win, but they can wear these uniforms that have a design based on the Russian flag. All these uniforms today have these designs based on national colors and symbols and so forth. So you're not going to be able to tell the difference. And this is so weak. For example, when you look at one of the worst uh, Olympic federations, UWW, the so-called United World Wrestling, has their seating out for the Olympics, and they list the athletes and the countries they represent, and they have them all. The Russians, who obviously Russia has a lot of great wrestlers, they all have them listed as representing Russia. And when they put out the seating on their Twitter page, they show the athlete and the weight class and the seating rank of the top wrestlers and their national flag. They have the Russian flag there. So they're just flouting this.
Right.
And not too many people are saying anything about this. This is an absurd, there's no real ban going on of Russia at these Olympics.
So
And the whole,
Eddie, do you not get to interview people like Coates, or you can't like request an interview to ask him questions like, why is he allowing it? Do you think he's being pressured by the networks? I mean, why do you think the Olympics are happening right now?
no,
Is
I
it
haven't tried with people like that because I don't think they know who I am, and I wouldn't get anywhere getting with them. And I know they just give a lot of crap. I've heard some people interview him and they just give him softball interviews. Those are the kind of things that he will take, or they will just have these short uh, online Zoom calls or press conferences where there'll be 25 or 30 minutes worth of questions, and they usually aren't. Sometimes they ask certain things, but the bottom line where they're doing this is money. They get about 75, the IOC gets about 75% of its income from the broadcast rights. But the
right?
bulk of that is Comcast NBC in the United States. And NBC has also been looking to push their new Peacock streaming service, which has gotten zero traction among people, by putting some Olympic events on there. But the whole thing is tainted now. And I don't know how much interest there is really going to be in the Olympics because of the pandemic. While it's lessening in the US because we're starting to get high rates of vaccination, it's still here. People are still getting sick. There's a rebound in some areas, particularly places like Missouri, where you have a very low rate of vaccination, not surprising. And in certain countries have reinstated lockdowns, so which have had vaccination for a while, of one lockdowns of 1 degree or another, including in the UK and in Singapore and a number of other countries have done that. And as we've seen, the situation is worsening in Tokyo after they too early relaxed this other state of emergency. They're going to have another state of emergency, as it looks like a fifth wave of infections from COVID-19 might be coming. So we know why they're doing it. I just don't, I wouldn't find any benefit to get propaganda from these people. So I've heard their interviews, and they're not going to allow anything like this
Right.
to go on. It's not worth it. I would rather, I'll tell you who I would like to speak with at some point is Mr. Grigorishin, a Ukrainian who's a big critic of the IOC, and he started the International Swimming League and he's trying to get a number of other leagues going that will be professional leagues for world-class athletes in sports that do not have them again. So, and originally he was opposed by FINA, the Olympic Swimming Federation, but they had to back off because the athletes were really pissed off at them. Whether he's able to succeed, what the governance is, we're going to see.
Right.
We're going to see where that goes. I'd rather try and track down somebody like that than wasting my time with Coates.
Right. All right. Well, listen, you guys, if you want to make a donation to support trans rights and their fight for liberation, then you guys need to go to the Transgender Law Center, and they are on Twitter at Trans Law Center. You guys give them a donation, check them out, give them a follow, so we can support our athletes, support our trans families' human rights, just basic human rights, people.